Heresy is not a word that you tend to hear very much in St. Mary Abbots, we being a Bible-believing Orthodox church, but this morning it's a word that we are going to hear, and I call out before you the person who's been using it in this church, none other than our pastoral assistant, Louis. Heresy. Not a heretic, but heresy because he's been studying at the moment at St. Mellitus the life of the early church and the notable heresies and the notable heretics who go along with them during that patristic period, that first 400 years of the church's life, act as rather good signposts if you're trying to get your head around what was going on in the ancient Near East. If you're going to be an explorer of that era, then you make your way from heresy to heresy and see how the church's orthodox path wound between them. They sound rather exciting, I think, heresies and heretics, and so presumably weary patristic tutors hope to woo sleepy students with their stories of historical conflict. Well, it's certainly got Louis going, and if you'd like to hear about Marcion, the heretic, and even worse, if you'd like to hear why Louis thinks he was actually an all right bloke, then he'll be very pleased to talk to you about that after the service, if you're not full of heretics by the end of this sermon. And the heretic that I want to talk to you about today is one whom St. John had in his sights when he wrote the words we heard from his first letter today. John writes, "This is he that came by water and blood, even Jesus Christ, not by water only, but by water and blood." References there to his baptism that we celebrate today by water, and by blood to his death, his crucifixion. And the heretic in question is a man named Cerinthus. According to Irenaeus, who was a 2nd century Christian theologian, Cerinthus taught that Jesus was a regular human, born of Joseph and Mary, who was exceedingly righteous and wise, and that Jesus was possessed of a divine entity called the Christ at his baptism. So at the moment that the dove appears and comes and alights upon him, so then he became divine. And that enabled him to teach about the Father and to perform miracles. And then that same divine entity left Jesus just before his crucifixion. What Cerinthus was denying was that Jesus was fully human and fully divine throughout his life. And you may be thinking, well, so what? Wasn't this man just another Christian with a slightly different take on things? After all, different parts of the church are always arguing with one another. And indeed, you're right, even within the Anglican fold, we can't see eye to eye over so many issues. And you're not wrong, there is significant disagreement, but, and importantly, within certain limits. You will not find anyone preaching in an Anglican church today recommending to you Cerinthus' doctrine that Jesus was not really divine and he only adopted a bit of divinity for a certain period of his life. We, with churches around the world, have recited and will recite the same creed together. We confess faith in the same Jesus Christ. And whatever differences of opinion we may have over church practice or worship style or even the conduct of our private lives, they pale in comparison to our agreement that Jesus is Lord. Yes, the church is not united as it should be, and indeed, at the end of this month we will be praying for a week for the unity of the church, but it is not so divided. You might never have heard of Cerinthus, but if you were a 2nd or 3rd or 4th century Christian, you certainly would have done. He was a significant opponent of the early church. And there's a much beloved story passed down from Polycarp. Polycarp was a disciple of St. John of letter fame, passed from Polycarp to Irenaeus, who then writes it down in Greek for us in about the year 180 in his work against heresies, and that book survives till this day, and so we read it there. And it's about St. John the Apostle. And according to the story, John the Apostle is inside a Roman bathhouse getting clean, as was the custom of his day. Through the hot steam, he suddenly makes out across the bathroom the heretic Cerinthus sitting across the room. John immediately jumps up and he flees the bathhouse without finishing his ablutions. Irenaeus offers us these words, and I quote, that John says, "Let us fly, lest even the bathhouse fall down, because Cerinthus, the enemy of truth, is within." Not only did John flee the bathhouse, but he also bothered to take the time to set down what he saw as Cerinthus' errors and to offer us a different vision. And so we hear today, this is he that came by water and blood, even Jesus Christ. Not by water only, but by water and blood. Against Cerinthus' claim that Jesus only became divine at his baptism and that it was removed from him before his death, John points to a more holistic view, not just by water, but by blood. Jesus is human and divine, God incarnate from the beginning and at the moment of his death. Well, Cerinthus disappeared from the life of the church, and he was forgotten, and his name is not familiar to most of us. But the kind of questions that he raised did not go away so easily, and indeed sometimes we still hear them raised today. Every now and then we have questions raised to the church about Jesus' historicity. It's normally some PhD student who's hoping to get published as a popular book, or it's a news editor of a daily newspaper who's misread an article and think that they found some grounds for an inflammatory headline. There is no question about Jesus' existence or about a number of key facts from his life, including the two that John mentions to us, his baptism and his death. These two are incontrovertible facts, both witnessed by multiple scriptural attestations and, importantly, witnessed by external sources, those who had no interest in writing them down were they not true. That Jesus didn't exist, or that he wasn't baptized, or that he didn't die by crucifixion are claims that carry no historical weight, and for the most part they're not regularly raised as objections to Christian faith. However, a more sort of nuanced version or question, similar to Cerinthus' heresy, is still alive and well, and it takes this form. People sometimes say to me, and I suspect that you've had similar conversations, yes, well, I agree with you. I think that Jesus was a wise man and that he had some clever things to say, that he offers some good advice about how to live a moral life. And it's normally offered as a kind of form of compromise, or it's held out as an olive branch. Here we can find some common ground. As if I might say to them, well, yes, that's about enough, or, well, you're getting the hang of it, or we share so much in common, don't we? That Jesus was a wise man, that he had some clever things to say, could not be farther from what I believe about Jesus. Namely, that he is the Son of God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the judge of the world, and the Lord of all. There is a big divide there. But Cerinthus' heresy is still alive, whispering in people's ear. But what if he was just a good guy? And then we can dispense with all that supernatural stuff that makes us feel uncomfortable. And John's reaction gives us some guidance about what our appropriate response might look like. Flee and don't even finish washing. Have nothing to do with such untruths. Or if you don't fancy being quite so dramatic, then, as John did later in his letters, argue against them, or at least direct people to arguments against them. And John's principal way of doing this is to reclaim historicity. This is he that came by water and blood, even Jesus Christ, not by water only, but by water and blood. Baptism and death are historical facts. They cannot be argued against. We should not allow others to characterize our faith as ahistorical or intellectually indefensible, as if it's believed only by the simple-minded or the foolish or the ascientific, as if it's a thing only for daydreamers and for those who read liberal arts degrees. Not so. It is a faith rooted in historical fact. In fact, that is the extraordinary claim that Christianity makes uniquely, that the unseen God is made visible in Jesus Christ, that God became human and walked among us, that just as we are baptized, so God was baptized by John in the Jordan, that just as we will one day die, so God also died on a cross at the hands of Roman soldiers at the place called the Skull outside Jerusalem, a place you can go and visit today. The birth by which we were born gave birth to God too. The baptism by which we were baptized is the same as the baptism that Jesus underwent. The death by which we will die is the same as the death that Jesus went through. This is no God who distances himself from humanity, who dips in just for the nice bits and then flees at a time of crisis. Our God is the God who has lived a full life as one of us, fully human and fully God. Amen.